He was in the med ward, and
You're broadcasting. It's time to go. We're live.
We are live.
Talking about the prison.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let's see here.
It's time to get started. Hate to break up the. Maybe I won't. They're still talking. Whenever Jared gets done, we'll start class.
I'm done.
Okay. That's what the teacher does, right? The first 2 times you don't stop, then you get called out. We're in Luke chapter 9.
Okay, so John, would you lead us in prayer?
Our Father in heaven, we are grateful and thankful in our hearts for today that you've given us, for the time that we've chose to come together and have a class about the word you had left for us. And God, we ask you to help us be open-minded and to listen and let all the things said in this class really marinate on our hearts, that we could be a more humble soul, a more loving soul, a better servant to humanity while we live in this world. God, we just pray that you go with us in this class, that you help us glean from your word at this hour. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, tonight's lesson was named Meals as Enacted Welcome and Revealing. Or I could have used the word revelation. Didn't want to tie it to the last book of the New Testament, but we get a revealing in this section, and what's just kind of easy Bible trivia stuff here to get us started and get people commenting. On a scale of 1 to 4, how often does the feeding of the 5,000 show up in the Gospels? So we know at least once because we're looking at Luke tonight. Okay. All right, 4. 4. This is more personal than Slido, isn't it? Okay. All right. Okay. So we got to guess at 2, and got to guess at 3, and we got to guess at 4. We know it's at least 1. It's unique in the sense it's actually in all 4. And Matthew 14, Luke 6, not Luke 6, Luke 9, Mark 6, and John 6, the feeding of the 5,000. Now the feeding of the 4,000 doesn't show up in all the gospel accounts. As a matter of fact, it doesn't show up in John at all. And I'd just be guessing at, I know it's in Mark, and I'm assuming it's probably the numbers 2, but right now that would just be a guess at the Bible trivia question. So does anybody know, and here's what's kind of difficult, and I'm sure Terry's experienced this as well this week. If you try to do the chronology of this and what happens immediately before, you get some different variations depending on which gospel you're looking at. But one thing is kind of consistent in there. There's an event that happens. There's a sad event that happens to kind of kick off right before the feeding of the 5,000. You may remember what that was from your readings this week. No? There's a happy occasion that I think happens immediately before and actually dovetails right into the feeding of the 5,000. But that during the lead up to this meal that Jesus is a part of, there's a sad event, and that is John.
Is it John the Baptist?
It's John the Baptist.
Get murdered?
John the Baptist is murdered, right? So it was interesting to me how these, and it was a result of a meal. It's interestingly enough, and it's a meal that looks totally different than the meal that Jesus is going to be a part of. And we'll try to unpack that a little bit as we go forward in the class. But the other thing, the really positive thing, the thing that makes us joyful and happy, is the disciples have just returned from their first mission, and where Jesus has given them the power to do some things. So here's another Bible trivia question: what could they do? What were the apostles empowered to do when they went on their I don't know why it's called a limited commission. I guess it's just limited in the sense that they're limited in their knowledge at this point. But
Also, didn't Jesus limit where they could go and who they could talk
well, that's
to?
true. Yeah.
And so I think it's more about don't talk to the Samaritans.
Yeah. And they limit themselves into acts. I mean, even without the commandment. But
that's partially.
They can do miraculous things. They were given the power to do some miraculous things.
okay, what's on the list there of miraculous things, Chris?
They were told to proclaim the gospel and to heal the sick,
Yep.
to heal those who need it.
Okay.
Cast out demons.
They could cast out demons. There's another one that Matthew gives us, and I think Matthew may be unique in this one. Jesus gave him the power to raise the dead. Now if you're sitting at the card table, that's several aces stuffed into your shirt there. Not that I've ever done that, and I don't even know what game we're playing at this point, but that's a big deal. And not that casting out demons is not a big deal. It's all, but the other part is he's given them a message to preach. And here's another thing that they've given them. He's given them a pattern of life to follow, and that is not to rely on themselves, and not to rely on their stuff, and not to rely on any externals, but to rely on what? Yep. Rely on the Savior. Rely on what God has done and what God will do. And I think he bookends that in Matthew 28 and verse, if 20 is the last one or 21, whichever. And lo, I'm with you always, even in the spirit of kingdom building. Jesus is always there and always behind it. So we'll stop there. I mean, I want to do just a little bit, kind of get everybody wound up. And I think I'll give it a C- on how effective I was there. So Terry, what struck you about the setting or the timing of this particular feeding here?
Well, I think one of the things that's really interesting is this is the only miracle in all four Gospels.
Yeah.
And so it's grand significance when you think of it that way. And so and there's a lot in this chapter. I mean, you talk about the disciples, what I was thinking about while you're talking about they can do all these things, my mind's immediately drawn to towards the end of this lesson, we're going to get to the Mount Transfiguration, time permitting. And immediately after that, there's the child that they could not take care of. Mm-hmm. So, the chapter opens with them having the ability to even raise the dead. And then we get to a point where they can't even cast out a demon. Yeah. And that's the passage that the ESV's taken it out, but where this can only be done through fasting and prayer. Jesus says. Yeah. So all those things come to my mind, but it's really interesting. I also thought about studying this week about just remembering, if you remember back to the Following the Messiah series, that you think about some of this and how that, the setting as far as the placement of this is just after Jesus reunites with them. We're told, it's not here, it's probably Mark, that they try to go to a desolate place, almost like so that Jesus and them can go off and he can hear their stories and he can hear them recounting, and the people won't let him. Yeah. That's the thing that always sticks out in my mind. Yeah. Is this probably, of all the passages in Scripture of the Gospels, really kind of helps us understand the multitudes and their pursuit of Jesus. Because the other thing is, this is not just 5,000, it's 5,000 men. Mm-hmm. So if you were to add in, and you might go, well, how many more people were there? Well, we know it's at least 5,001 because there's a boy there. So it's one of those deals where, you know, this is probably close to 10,000 people, and that may be a conservative estimate.
Yeah.
So you're talking about, I mean, think about going someplace and it's just kind of like going down and suddenly you've got enough people to fill the BJCC arena basically following you around. That's the setting of
Yeah.
the picture, and I think that blows our mind a little bit.
Where does it happen?
It happens on the western side of the Lake of Gennesaret, Sea of Galilee.
It's outside of Bethsaida and away. I mean, that's part of what it is. They leave from there to get away from the people, and they end up on the seashore there trying to.
So it's not Gentile territory.
Oh
No.
no.
It looks like to me that the setting in the feeding of the 4,000 looks to me like it's on the other side, kind of toward the Decapolis, and that's a point that I've made with some timidity through the years. Is this side? I think you got to tie in the work that the 12 have done, going through the villages somewhat, but now they're not completely. They're not completely satiated with what they've gotten from the apostles, but they pointed toward Jesus, and now the crowd is enormous. It's not been. I don't think it's been that long ago, really, that Jesus was turned away. I mean, he was dishonored in his hometown, and now there are thousands flocking to him. So if you knew about, there's a bunch of guys walking around. They can heal the sick, they can raise the dead, they can throw out demons, and they're all talking about this Jesus.
And this is where Bethsaida is, from what we know, where the Jordan dumps into the Sea of Galilee. So it is up north.
Mm-hmm.
It's further up, and it's only about 3 miles from Capernaum.
Yep.
But it's still squarely, in what we'd call Galilee.
And Mark 2 tells us that actually this is where Jesus has a home. He has apparently a rented home there in Bethsaida. But
Bethsaida just means house of the fisher. So
yeah,
it's
so I
obviously
don't-
a port, sea kind of town. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Okay. So there's some things going on here. Let's see here. Let's get to a question or two. Of course, I do this every time. What had the apostles been doing immediately prior to the gathering of the 5,000? They've been out preaching, and then what's the reaction of the crowd when they find out Jesus is in the area? Yeah. And I'm thinking, okay, let's put this into Chelsea perspective. So Chelsea is approximately 125 saints, including children. So how many people do we have on any given Sunday that need something in terms of medical assistance? Maybe 5%, or
During the service?
No, not during the.
I was confused.
No, I mean people that are in
Glad
need.
we have Jared.
Yeah, Jared's going to be a busy guy. We have
Yeah.
5% needing medical assistance every
Yeah.
service.
Yeah. You said on a Sunday. I've only seen one person need it during the service. And I wasn't preaching, thankfully. So that
Okay,
doesn't
when
make
we print the announcements, we have a number of people who are in need of healing and other things that Jesus would be doing. Imagine what 10,000 looks like in terms of just the sheer volume of, and these are people that don't have Jared to go to. They don't have modern medicines. They don't have modern techniques. They don't have.
But I think where you have to kind of even set the tone more is this percentage is a lot bigger than what ours would be, because these are people that are following him for the purpose of healing. So if you want to get a better view of it, go sit in Jared's waiting room and notice all the sick people that come in, right? That's what you're looking at. I mean, and they're not all that way. But a majority of them are coming to him not for the message, but also to be healed, and we see those stories. I think it's what I'm saying is it's much greater than 5%.
Yeah,
of
I
this
would-
10,000.
yeah.
You know, this is a motivation for them to come after him.
Yeah, and
truthfully.
even on the conservative side, if it's just 5 or 10%, that's a big number.
It's a big, but I think it's much bigger. I
Yeah,
would
probably
estimate
so.
it much bigger.
Probably so.
Yeah.
And we don't know the, we don't know all the motivations of all the people there, but there is a strong, there's a more carnal motivation at the end of the day when we see how few follow, knowing the, how difficult what Jesus lays out. We know that the numbers drop off significantly from that. So this, whatever the percentage is, what does Jesus do for them? List the things that he does for them. Okay. All right. He heals them. Right. Okay. All right. I heard teaches, and what was the one right?
Welcome.
He welcomes them. Okay. So that's so I want to contrast this with what Herod just had. Herod had a big dinner party, and Herod was not thinking about John the Baptist. John Baptist was just in jail there, and it said Herod listened to him gladly. We kind of get the impression that he was almost listening to him on a regular basis, weekly, if not daily. It seems like. But he throws a party. Well, let's look at some of the differences between the two groups of people. Who's at Herod's party? It's essentially the in crowd. Those in power are invited to Herod's party. Who's welcomed by Jesus to this place? I'm reminded of a passage from 1 Corinthians that not many mighty, not many noble, not many of that strata are called, but you just have average people, and they're all welcome to Jesus. So imagine some of these people trying to gate crash Herod's party. They would not be invited, number one, and best case scenario, they're headed into a jail for breaking in. Jesus' message is for everyone, and Jesus' invitation is for everyone, and he welcomes all to that. What's the difference in what's going on in the parties? Okay, so Herod is serving bacchanalia, which was an old god of wine and song, I think. I may have that wrong. Jesus is delivering truth and delivering healing, and then the thing I was thinking about is that Herod's entertainment doesn't look anything like Jesus's get together. Jesus is tending to people. Herod is appealing to the more sensual side of life, for sure, and so. Now, the next question I've got, and I may be out of order in the book here, but when Herod hears about Jesus, isn't it amazing that I'm jumping in here before I ask the question. Herod wants to see Jesus and can't for whatever reason. Yet 10,000 have figured out the way to get to see Jesus. Tells you a little something about how badly he wanted to see Jesus. But who did he think Jesus was? What was the counsel coming from Herod, who he thought Jesus was? Okay, prophet. And all these people would have to be raised from the dead, the ones he's referring to, because he knows he put John the Baptist to death. And Herod knows enough about the law to know that Elijah has been gone a long time. And then prophets of old means even all the way back further than that. So when Jesus asked Peter, who do people say that I am? What's the answer? It's the same answer. So what's the word? The common, the thought of the day. And
Rumor.
yeah, the rumor mill has turned it up to this. But it is interesting some of the things that the book pointed out about some connections between these three, and then we're going to see a definite connection if we get to the point of the Transfiguration. What did you think about what the book had to say about Jesus and how he's he eclipses, or he there's a tie back to each one of these?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think the Mount Transfiguration makes that even better. But we know that, I mean,
Agreed.
Looking back, all of them were preparing. I think that's one of the interesting things, is that it's not really just John the Baptist that's preparing the way for Jesus, but Moses and Elijah are as well. Mm-hmm. The law and the prophets are preparing the way for Jesus. And so everything...
Creation prepares us for
we
Jesus.
talked about this some in the Genesis class and other moments. Everything is pointing to that. So the reason why Jesus can point back to these so well is because actually they're pointing forward to Jesus. And in both of them, in many of the prophets, you have a lot of foreshadowing coming through of what is to come with Jesus. And there's some interesting kind of details that we may miss, and I've never picked up. But one of them that popped out in the study, and I don't think this was in the book, maybe it was, I just forgot. But in my study with Carson over this, one of the interesting things was that this phrase of 50 each, when he has them sit down, I don't think that was in the book. But,
no.
But what's really interesting about the phrase 50 each is that there's only one other time that the idea of 50 occurs a lot, obviously. But the idea of 50 each, in fact, I think the idea of 50 occurs 160 times in the Greek Bible. But 50 each only occurs twice. And that's here, and then in 1 Kings 18:13, where Obadiah tells Elijah that he has supplied the prophets food and water 50 each. And so there's these like little cloak connections at times that we wouldn't pick up on. We wouldn't look for that. But they're there, and it feels like Luke potentially is purposely tying us back. And what makes that interesting is just something as subtle as that in this story still connects to Elijah in this chapter that has all these Elijah references. And then, of course,
Moses that's an easy one. Yeah.
And the manna, the idea of manna, and that's not really brought out in Luke's version as much as in John's version. Manna becomes a connection in John 6 directly. And so you have all these little things going on, and even the miraculous feeding of Elisha in 2 Kings 4, when that was brought up in the book, I remember.
Yep.
So you have all these different little things making all of these connections in the way Luke's telling the story, almost to reinforce to the audience that would be familiar with all these things. Well, yeah, Jesus he's the culmination of all the prophets. He's the culmination of the law. He's all of that. He's the manifestation of all of it. So there's a reason why these people would see him and think about those things, because he's the fulfillment of all of that.
And he's the fulfillment of when Moses says in Deuteronomy 18 that there'll be another prophet rise up like him. That's being pointed to from the message from from Herod rather, and then later on, just the common theme running through all the people is that he's got to be one of these three. And the prophet of old for a Jewish mind, it goes right back to Moses, and which is interesting, because really the Jesus walking on the water comes next. But after that, I think they said like 8 days or something. One of the Gospels tells us there's a period of 7 or 8 days that go past, and then it's the Mount of Transfiguration. And then that's the story that Terry was alluding to, that you had Peter, James, and John with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration, but you had all the rest of the apostles in town, unable to cast out a demon. And they just come back from a trip. They're less than 2 weeks coming back from a trip where they've had the ability to cast out demons. They've had the ability to raise the dead. They've been. It sounds like they've been received everywhere they've been, even though they're given instructions when you don't get received. But all that fades pretty fast. It's just
Well, I
like,
would suggest this meal shows that it fades. Because
well, sure, yeah.
think about what they just went through. They were sent with nothing, and they were told, wherever you go, let them welcome you, and you have nothing. So they were dependent on God providing through means, right? And they didn't starve. They came back
through
and-
non-miraculous means. So
they non-miraculous means, but they also were able to do, while they're being provided for, able to do miraculous things, cast out demons and heal the sick.
Mm-hmm.
So then, they want to send these people away, and I think what's interesting is the way this story goes is Jesus says, "You feed them,"
Mm-hmm.
and their response to that after this, and again, this whole thing starts with them telling Jesus about the great stories of the trip, all these things they could do. So within a matter of hours, not days, hours of reporting this back to Jesus, Jesus says, well, you do it. And it's almost like Jesus is saying, you just did all these things, you can do this too. And they're like, well, we can't do any of this.
Yeah.
How are we supposed to feed these people?
And I'm going to defend them a little bit. And he didn't actually tell them that he would give them the power to create food. He said, you're going to be able to do this, this, and this. So they had blocked themselves in, and we do the same thing. We sometimes in our lives we have the tendency, well, God can do this. Well, God can do anything other than what He said He wouldn't do to start with. God can't lie, but we limit God in our own the way we see things, and they're limiting the Savior here because for whatever reason. The healing stuff came easy, and the teaching and not preaching, that came easy. And
Maybe, but 8 to 10 days later, they can't even cast a
they
demon
can't do
out.
it. Yeah.
And the point being, and that's one of the reasons Jesus is teaching them, I think, is, hey, look, with prayer and fasting, God's going to make anything happen. And I think that's all of this. One of the threads through this is the failure of the apostles to fully recognize the power they've been given. Because it's not just that here, well, he didn't tell us we could feed people. The very thing he told them they could do, they can't do a week later. Mm-hmm. They just failed to do. So it's really interesting to kind of see that. It sounds cynical. I will readily admit to you, I would be just like them, though. Because there's a part of this where you would go, and I don't even think it's the limitation. It's, hey, I might be able to cast a demon out of one guy, but feed 10,000 people? So many people I can't really count them.
It's too big.
That's too big of an ask. Jesus, I can't really do that. So then he turns it into the teaching moment by doing it. And we won't have time for all this, but there's a lot of really neat nuggets hidden throughout some of this section of Scripture. And one of those I'll just take a moment to talk about, which is there's this 4-step kind of blessing about the bread that he uses, and it's maybe something that we would typically overlook, and at the same time the problem with that is that you really shouldn't do that, just because not only do you see this, it's the same terminology here, the Last Supper, the meal with Emmaus, and what is interesting in each of those cases with this kind of formulaic prayer that is there, and I'm trying to find it in my notes to give you the 4 terms. Here it is. It's he took bread, he blessed, he broke, and he gave. And I think there's 4 times, and every time what happens is Jesus is revealed after that. And so you have this meal that focuses on bread, blessing, breaking, and giving. And then it's the revelation, a further revelation of who Jesus is. You have Peter, the revelation through Peter. You have the revelation in the upper room and him telling and explaining everything to them. You have with Emmaus, this sits down to eat, and then, he's the... So you have that repeating, this pattern over and over again, which is another thing that's just pretty amazing to look at.
And Luke jumps on that.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, Luke is the only gospel writer that puts this section where it comes up, the revealing of Jesus, and he's gonna ask the question, Peter, who do people say that I am? And then Peter gives the answer, and he said, but who do you say that I am? And so that's the revealing that takes place here. In Mark, it comes after the feeding of the 4,000. It comes after Jesus questioning them about the loaf that they've got, or leaven. And then what's real interesting about Mark is that it comes immediately after the two-step miracle of healing the blind man, where first he sees people walking like trees, and
Dimly.
and Jesus is pointing, saying, "This is you," in the miracle.
Yeah, that Mark 8 is the turning point for Mark. It's where Jesus stops with kind of this cloaked revelation of who he is, and with that miracle, it's okay. You've seen dimly who I am. Now Jesus pulls and starts talking about he's going to die and rise again, almost immediately after Peter's confession.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's thought that Mark puts that miracle kind of it's in Mark 8, so in the center point of his book, intentionally to kind of, not necessarily chronologically,
No.
but to tell the story of now the disciples are going to be able to truly start seeing, because Jesus is no longer going to hide what he's saying to them. He's going to kind of peel the scales off their eyes and make them be able to see it fully.
Yeah.
And so that's why Mark puts the confession there, I think, is because he's intentionally not being chronological, whereas Luke, a historian, gives greater detail to chronology probably than all the gospel writers, we assume.
Yeah, but Luke's got a point that he's wanting to make here as well, and we shouldn't miss that they don't view chronology the same way we do, and they're not going to put the obviously the death, burial, and resurrection back before Jesus visiting the temple at 12. I mean, that's never going to show up in the manuscripts like that. But they don't have the same OCD-ness that I have about chronology and about, this step and that step. And when that gets drilled into, if you like you're taking chemistry classes, you do this step first or you do this step second, unless you want to blow the place up, which, don't tell a bunch of teenagers that you got an opportunity to blow the place up, because sooner or later one of them's going to take you up on it. But things get in chronological order, and so that's the way we view it. But the writers have intention, even though Luke is. He says he starts off his gospel. Many have taken the opportunity to write an account about Jesus, and I felt like it was a good thing to do this for you, Theophilus, and I'm giving you an orderly account of what transpired. But he does have purpose here, in that Jesus gets revealed at this point, and the formula that gets used here points to the fact that he's cognizant of that.
Yeah, I think what Luke does is he uses more linguistic things within the chronology probably to reveal his things, but he is making sure we understand this is who Jesus is, in every case. And so again, it's 3 meals. You have the Last Supper, you have this meal, and you have the Emmaus Supper. And in all 3 of those, there's a revelation and recognition of Jesus as the Savior or the Son of God. And so it's really interesting there. The other thing real quick before because we only got about 10 minutes left is, and we've talked about this before, but this 12 baskets is important too. The number 12 is going to always probably call to mind. We think about what when we think about the 12. We think about maybe 12 tribes. But ultimately, going forward, what the 12 really takes on meaning for is just a representative of God's people. And that becomes really important to put that into context. When you start including the Gentiles, it just includes all of God's covenant people, not just the tribes. And so this idea of the 12 is certainly, I think, a sign that what Jesus gives is for anyone and everyone to become his people, in that sense.
I think too, in Mark, I think it's important to point out, Jesus points out to us that they're tired and they're hungry. They hadn't had a lot to eat. And so you can just imagine, hey, why don't we go rest a while,
Yeah.
guys? Let's go over here and rest a while. And then all of a sudden there's an about face. Says, well,
Yeah.
sorry, guys, not today.
But Jesus is doing what he can to protect and help. I mean, and get them something to eat because they've been on a long journey, and that's Mark 6:31 gives us that information. But the flip side, and Chris was there in Chris and I have had this conversation before. When the 4,000 were fed, how many baskets were left over from that?
7.
7. And it's interesting, and I forget the verse, but it's in Acts 15. It tells us the number of nations in Cana, and they were 7.
Mm-hmm.
And Chris,
Deuteronomy 7:1 also mentions the 7 nations are
Right.
stronger than you.
right?
Yeah.
And sometimes in the Torah, it will only list 6 for whatever reason. But there's when Acts refers to it, and that point in Deuteronomy, and there's one other point that I can't, where it actually names them one by one, and you count them, and it's 7 for sure. But it seems like the second feeding is over toward the Decapolis, which is more of a Gentile owned and run territory. So when he says when he's in the boat, and he says when he asks them, they're arguing about yeast and about bread. Did we not bring enough bread? And Jesus is trying to get them to a different spot. He said, how many baskets were left over, and how many baskets were left over? I think he's making a point that they might understand and see more clearly than we would. Not that it would stick forever, because we're slow to learn. I'm talking about humans, and we're stubborn, and then we forget stuff, that we have learned. So.
And it's interesting that the final word, our English kind of messes this up, but the final word in the Greek is the 12. And so that's the last word in this telling of the story is the Greek word for 12. And so
Where's that at?
in Luke 9.
Okay.
That the way it's told, the final Greek word in the miracle is the Greek word for 12. And so that would be, if you were going to read that in the language, that's the last thing you get is this ending on 12, which is like an exclamation point of sorts to the story. And that's why you might sit there and go, well, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal. So what's 12 baskets? Like, no, it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
It's a pretty important point to not overlook.
It's a miracle on top of the existing miracle to make sure it falls just like that. That you get, and that you get this lesson that's not happened yet, and it's gonna happen.
Correct.
And it's for us as well. I think we've made it to the end of the. You got some nuggets. Either that, or
we've not really talked about. I mean, we could dive into the Transfiguration a little bit. We've not fully.
Yeah, we haven't
gone
really
into that.
gotten.
But I think most of us probably are aware of the story. Obviously, that like you said, Peter, James, and John go up on a mountain to pray, and then there's this. Jesus is transformed, and Moses and Elijah appear in a similar format. And it's interesting here that you ever notice, like, most of these important moments, they're sleepy. Peter and James and John are sleepy again.
I hadn't thought of that.
And then Peter wakes up kind of and wants to suddenly build tents, tabernacles for all of them. And of course, we know what happens is what? What happens is that's kind of going on.
God speaks.
Yeah, God interrupts, not Jesus, but God interrupts, which is, I don't understand how Peter can keep doing the same thing over and over again after this point when God interrupts him and kind of goes, quit being so, spontaneous, Peter. Just
Quit
sit there
acting
and
like Peter.
Yeah, just
Quit
sit there and
acting-
do what you're told. Because, but what does God say?
This is my son, my chosen one, listen to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine how that sounded.
It's obviously in the voice of James Earl Jones. By the way, when's the other time that these words are used?
Mary at the wedding tells servants to do what he says.
Not
Whatever
that
it
part. This is
Think
my
about
son.
the baptism.
The baptism of Jesus. And what is God doing in those moments? He's making a confession about who Jesus is, truthfully. I mean, and I think one of the things that's really important is that's ultimately the confession we make of faith, right? Is the same statement God made, which is Jesus is God's Son. He is testifying really to the earth and to whoever's there who the identity of Jesus is. And I think what's really powerful is this happens after Peter's confession, at least in Luke's account.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, it's confirmation in that sense to Peter. Yeah, this is who Jesus is. It's powerful.
So
thing.
go ahead, Mark.
How would they have known who Moses and Elijah were?
Man, I have no idea. Probably from the statutes that looked exactly like. I don't know. The best possible assumption would be just that it's revealed some way. I mean, there's been some thought that, well, Moses, I say this jokingly, Moses obviously was carrying the Ten Commandments like he is in all of these pictures. I'm not really sure. I don't have a great answer for that. I just know that he recognizes them.
I have no answer.
Yeah.
Whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's just not revealed. They just know. And
Yeah.
which I got to share this meme with you. I hope it's hopefully that I don't think it's not offensive, but it's kind of funny.
If you deem it not offensive, it can't be.
No, it's not
Yeah, okay,
offensive. It's and I have not seen the meme, but Karen wanted to save it for me, and somebody got lost in the interweb. But there's these four guys, and there's one guy writing, and over his head is Matthew, and the other three are overlooking. It's Mark, Luke, and John. They're copying off of Matthew's work. It's kind of a cute thing, but
It's kind of ironic since Mark was written first, though, right?
yeah, I think it was, but that's
Yeah.
that's
The meat writer didn't
for a
have a
different
good foundation.
audience.
Yeah.
For scholars would say it's Q that they're looking
Yeah.
in on to. So this Mary reveals something. I skipped over this, and this was just a nugget. But in Luke chapter 1, it's a prophecy that Mary is given, and which is talking about God. He has filled the hungry with good things, and the rich He sent away empty. I was thinking that's such a rendition of what has happened here between the rich people in the rich party and those who are in the meal with the Messiah here. It's totally different. Even though there's not 10,000 followers after, in general, they reject the message.
Yeah.
But we'll see that there's some openness that gets created, and
Well, in John, we're going to go there next. Because in Luke, the next day, John tells us that they follow him again. And that's where Jesus basically says,
Yep.
you're not following me for the right reasons. You're following for physical bread.
And it's tied to chapter 5 in John, where Jesus is saying the signs faith is not enough. And that's
Yeah.
how he closes out chapter 5
Yeah.
of John. And so the signs faith, even though they've been healed, even though they've gotten fed miraculously, that's not enough to make a disciple. And I think probably all of us, if we are honest, at one point in our lives, we go, I sure wish I could have seen that. I sure wish I could have been there. And what Jesus says is the faith that you really need for salvation is not tied to that. It's not tied to seeing the signs and seeing the miracles, because these people did, and it didn't create faith there.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons I could be a little cynical, I know, but these people are largely missing the message because the main motivation a lot of times seems to be the physical things Jesus can do for them, whether it's the healing or the casting out of the demon or those kind of things. And And it's understandable, by the way. I mean, if you had cancer and there was this new doctor who had come up with a cure that nobody else had before, and it was absolutely a cure, and there was no denying it, you would do whatever it took to go make that happen. And I mean, it's understandable, but us putting that into context, and really and truthfully, I think that's part of what you get into in John 6. Like you said, is the signs are not enough. The signs were there to try to help them understand the message was a valid message. But they were more in tune with the signs than the message is really the problem.
Yeah.
And, after Jesus tells them that, and not so many words in John 6, we're told that the majority of them walk away because it's just too difficult for
Yep.
them.
Yep.
And
The message is too difficult.
and that's what's really interesting about all of this, is that it was just too difficult for them.
And so let's never overlook the feeding of the 5,000. Sometimes we kind of look at, that's a good children's story or great VBS class. But every single gospel writer puts that in. And so there are lessons to be gained from each telling of the feeding of the 5,000. And I'm certain we haven't uncovered them all at this point. I know I haven't. I'm done.
You're 2 minutes over, so you are done.
All right, done.
In